Here's a brief but annoying message to let you know that you could have first heard this episode 9 months ago if you were a subscriber to our Iron Filing Society Patreon offering.
For the price of a pint and a St Clement's each month, you can get up to 4 episodes a week, 9 months before the rest of the world gets them. Early access to regular episodes, lots of other marvellous benefits, and there's absolutely no adverts or brief but annoying messages like this that will get right on your ticks.
Find out more and subscribe now at tftimemachine.com/ironfilings.
Here we go, here we go, here we go, here we go, this is it!
This is Top Flight Time Machine. I am Andy Hotbody Dawson. Pow, pow, pow.
I'm Sam Nifty Delaney, so what?
Welcome along. It's the second part of the Roussos Odyssey. We're looking at the life and times and achievements of Demis Roussos, or Dennis Roussos as he was called, in our house in the mid-1970s, because the concept of a name such as Demis was completely alien to us, because that's how it was. Although I say that, saying that the idea of someone from Greece wasn't foreign to us, because my auntie married a Greek fella in 1977.
Oh, I bet that caused a scandal.
Get that for a bit of Northeast exotica, Sam. Yeah.
Fucking hell, I bet that was the fucking talk of the town, wasn't it?
She was she was just a Sunderland gal, and he was over here at Sunderland Polytechnic as a student.
Hang on, this sounds like the beginning of a pulp song.
It does a bit, doesn't it? Yeah. He wanted to live like common people. And,
he came from Greece, he had a thirst for knowledge.
He certainly did. And they got together and they got married in 1977. So I like to think of myself, Sam, as being part Greek, even though there's no Greek blood in me.
You're partly Greek.
Cultural, not appropriation. A cultural infusion, let's say.
That's exactly like me. I like to think of myself as Italian. I have no Italian blood, but my aunt married an Italian man. And therefore, I've got Italian cousins and sort of have always tried to masquerade, you might say, as part Italian, which is a complete fiction. That thing of people changing names just because they can't handle anything that's different. My grandma did that sometimes with names like, my mum was a carer for old people, right? In the 90s, and she had various clients, and it was like, it would be worth a podcast series in itself just to deep dive each of the clients. I remember them all so vividly because my mum talks more than I do, and she would just come home and tell these stories, probably rather indiscreet, of the various things. Oh, it's Thursday, that's the day for so-and-so, him over in Ealing, and then this day it was her over in Brentford or whatever. And there was this one bloke who she looked after who was like quite aristocratic, and his name was Denzel.
Right.
And my grandma just refused. She'd clearly never. I mean, I don't think that's that exotic, but it's not a name that she'd encountered in her life,
that's
and therefore it's all.
It?
She was old school to the extent that anything that was at all outside of her usual frame of reference actually irritated her. Right. So when my mum said, well, I've got to go over, I've been looking after Denzel today, my grandma would just look at me, ignore my mum, and go, what's she saying? Dendel? Dennis? What is it? Like that. And I mean, it's Denzel. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? She's not making up a name just to anger you, right? And but she'd also do it about things. So she'd go, well, as we often talk about, Nans love to go to canteens within department stores. That was her favourite thing. I'll take myself up to BHS. I went in their cafe and I treated myself to a crescent and a cappuccino. Right?
A cup of chino.
A cup of chino. But it made sense in a way. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like a crescent. Well, croissants are shaped like crescents, aren't they?
Yeah, I guess so.
Maybe that's what it
French
means.
For crescent, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Would make sense, wouldn't it? And a cappuccino kind of makes sense as well, doesn't it? So she goes, I'll have a crescent and a cappuccino at BHS. And then she goes, and then on the way home, I will nip to the offer licence. She called off licence offer licence. And I thought for years, I used the same word because I just thought that's what it was called, an offer licence. It took friends taking the piss out of me to make me understand that it was just called off licence.
Again, that's another one of those cultural things within a family that we've talked about before.
Yeah,
things that get normalised that are actually quite mad. but because they're within your family, then you don't realise. Like, my favourite biscuit to this day is the McVitie's plain chocolate digestive. It cannot be beaten. And when I was a kid, they were always called Ask-a-Mams. And because whenever I'd want one when I was a little kid, my dad would always say, "Ask your mum if you can have one or not." And then I always they became known as Ask-a-Mams. So until about the age of 10, probably now, if somebody said to me, "Do you want an Ask-a-Mam?" I'd know exactly what they meant. I'm the only person in the world that would do. But that's what it is.
She also said Waitrose instead of Waitrose, which that was another thing that she was hostile to when it opened near our house in London. She'd go, "Oh, they've opened that big Waitrose down the street. I won't be going there."
I've just looked, and croissant does indeed get its name from its shape. In French, it means crescent, it means crescent or crescent of the moon. So there you go.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's nice, isn't it?
My mum's got this mate called Delia, and whenever I see her now, which is rare, my mum's still friends with her, but my mum was friends with her back when I was like a very little boy, like a baby, toddler. And whenever I see her, which is rare, but it might be if my mum has a birthday party or something like that, I'll bump into her. And she always says, "Oh, here comes Sam. I want meat, Dee Dee." And I'd go, "What?" And I go, "What the fuck are you on about? Why do you always shout that at me?" She went, "Because whenever you saw me when you were a kid," her name's Delia, she said, "all you'd do is you'd see me and you'd come running, shouting at me, 'I want meat, Dee Dee.'" And I'd go, "Why?" And she goes, "Well, I don't know. Well, you called me Dee Dee because you couldn't say Delia." She said, "And as for the meat thing, I don't know. I must have once fed you some meat." And after that, you just associated me with meat. You just fucking charge up to me and go, even if we saw you in the street, you'd charge up to me and go, "I want meat, Dee Dee." Fucking
hell. That's quite scary coming from a kid.
Harrowing, isn't it? It's like something from a horror film.
So, what were we talking about? I can't remember now. Yeah, it's Dennis Roussos. Dennis Roussos. We'd got up to the bit where him and his group, Aphrodite's Child, progressive rock group, couldn't get into Britain. They were turned away at Dover due to visa problems. They retreated to Paris, signed a record deal, and their first recording sessions were delayed by the general strike of 1968. And I think that we were probably going to look at the general strike of 1968 and
go on a bit of a tangent.
Drag this out a little bit.
The general strike of 1968, which we talked about the French students last time. The other thing I meant to mention, which is quite relevant today, is that I read a brilliant book over the summer. It's called Demon Copperhead. It's been talked about quite a lot because it won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's by an American writer whose name I can't remember, a woman. And it's brilliant, right?
I'll tell you, it's Barbara Kingsolver. I've just had a look.
There you go. Right. So she took the story of David Copperfield and basically followed the pattern of that, but she set it sort of in kind of contemporary. It's not the American South. It's kind of like Virginia, I think, right? So it's kind of where traditionally where people have portrayed the idea of hillbillies being from, and it's where the writer's from. And much like David Copperfield, by the way, I've never read David Copperfield, but it's just one of those stories that you kind of somehow know a bit about because it's part of and it's like follows this boy's life, right? Rough life, mother dies, in and out of foster care, various different dramatic sad things happen, but he keeps going, and it's heartwarming, it's very funny, but also there's an interesting there's a lot of cultural history in it that I didn't know. And the woman, what's her name? Barbara Kingsolver, solver of kings. Yes, so she's from that part of the world, and it kind of really confronts the idea of the redneck, the so-called redneck, right? Because she tells this story, and I won't do it justice now because obviously, as is always the case with me, I only partially remember the facts. But she tells a bit about these like mountain rural communities in that part of America, where the rural poor have lived, and where very often, because they are very poor communities, they've built ways of like surviving and living with each other. Very often, just through like exchanging I mean, it sounds daft, but it really is like they live from the land, they grow food and livestock, they
like in the Good Life.
They exchange services and stuff like that. It's rural communities, right? And, you know, in like whenever, in the olden times, big mining companies came to town and they mined the mountains around there for coal. And they relied on all of these poor people in these rural communities to basically provide cheap labour to them.
Yeah.
And what they did was they basically, in order to make it a less competitive market in terms of wages, these huge rich mining companies bought up loads of the other large employers in those communities, right? So the big shops, the big services, they bought it all up. Therefore, they had less competition because they were setting the wages across the entire community, right? Sometimes huge swathes of a whole state were owned by one mining company, yeah? And if you own all of the employment, if you buy all the jobs, sometimes they would shut these other services and shops down, which would deprive that community of, like, basic things that they needed, you know, shops, maybe, like, even doctors' surgeries and things like that. They'd either shut shit down, right, or they would take it over and they'd be in charge of the wages, which meant that if you were being offered a job working in these coal mines and the money was shit, you couldn't turn around and go, well, I'll get a job somewhere else. Because the fucking mining company owned everywhere else, right? So they basically cornered entire communities into working. And one of the things was, I can't remember when this was, I guess it's the 19th century, they basically were paying these miners so little that in the end, the miners decided that they were just going to down tools anyway, and they would find a way to survive because it was actually an affront to them and their families, the amount that, because it was borderline slavery, right? Borderline slavery by people who presumably actually did have real slaves in those days in America, right? So what the mining companies did was they went to Washington, right, and told the politicians, listen, we're a huge employer, we're a huge contributor to the tax economy, and we're a big, rich, influential company, and you've got to help us because our staff, right, our labour are just refusing to work. So the government sent in the army to force these people to work, right? These people went to war, mountain communities went to war with actual federal troops, and they wore red bandanas around their neck. That was like their uniform. It was like a sort of an ad hoc army because they were basically having to defend themselves from being forced at gunpoint to work. Hence the name rednecks.
Right. Yeah.
And the redneck has become this derogatory term still to this day. And even if you watch shows like The Simpsons, which is my favourite all-time show, they have a lot of hillbilly redneck characters in it who are portrayed as idiotic. But in this book, she conveys the fact that the reason that America, right, has portrayed people from those communities as idiotic and thick, just like the English used to do with the Irish, right, is because often they didn't conform because they were so sick of having everything taken away from their communities and being forced into borderline slave labour that often they found effective ways to opt out of a really capitalist system, right, as the industrial economy grew. And basically live off the land, exchange goods and services with each other, shun consumerism, live modest lives, right? And look after each other, right? And she says, and you know, in this book, it doesn't come across as a political book. It comes across as a really charming story, but by stealth, she gets this stuff across.
Yeah.
And it makes you fucking stop and think about the sort of people who vote Trump. By the way, she is not a Trump apologist by any means. But what she is she goes, people like to characterise, say, people from those communities as being gun-toting and obsessed with their constitutional right to bear arms. Yeah. She said, and a lot of the time, that's portrayed as them just being lunatics, right? But a lot of it's to do with the fact that these are communities who remember being forced at gunpoint by the government to work for no money.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And that is why you have so much hostility to federal government in the United States. But also it's why everyone from the entertainment industry to politicians to journalists to everyone else in American popular culture portray hillbillies and rednecks as imbeciles because they're trying to shame them into taking part in the system. Because if they don't take part in the system, it fucks everyone else up because they need cheap slave labour, right? Yeah. And so she kind of ends up making you think that, like, think twice about laughing at these so-called rednecks, hillbillies. Very easy, especially in the Trump era, to think that every single person who's not fucking living in New York or California is a fucking gun-toting lunatic, like brain-dead arsehole. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm making this book sound deeply political, but like a lot of great novels, it doesn't feel like that at all. You feel like you're just reading a brilliant life story with humour and all the rest of it.
There's two Americas, really, isn't there? There's two Americas.
Yeah, there's the coasts and the middle.
This was apparent during the last election when the results were coming in. There's big city America, and like you said, there's rural America, and the two are really, really far apart in terms of attitudes and...
Yeah, but I think that what it made me think is I would probably, as an urbanite myself, I would, and as a sort of a liberal person,
very slick urbanite.
I'm a slick urbanite. If you're familiar with the work of Heaven 17, sort of imagine me as that kind of a guy in a penthouse, right?
Yeah.
But I would align myself with, I guess, the values and political outlook of those cities like Los Angeles, New York, which always vote for Democrats and stuff like that. And so you get taken in by this narrative that everyone else is a jerk. Like, like that big family in The Simpsons where there's always like 50 kids in the back of the truck and he takes them through the car wash for their weekly or their monthly bath, right?
Yeah.
And this book sort of makes you think that, first of all, that's a set of that is a set of unfair stereotypes that have largely been created with an agenda that is political and economic, right? And it's basically like, who provides the labour to keep those rich city folk in their nice cars and nice houses, right?
Street lights and things like that.
Yeah, or just fucking mining, and they're just like, if ever they refuse to basically work for fuck all, it's convenient to portray them as dangerous idiots. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Jalapeño.
And the reason that's on my mind today, apart from us talking about this strike, is that I've been thinking about that a lot, and I saw on the front page of the Telegraph today that there is a plan, and I don't know what the details are, but there is a plan to fucking force doctors off the picket line. So if doctors are planning on striking, and I just saw the headline, right? But it chilled me because it made me think of that book, because it said, plan to force doctors off picket line. The disruption that doctors going on strike causes is considered too dangerous to allow, and so the government are going to force them to work. Now, I don't know how you're going to force a doctor to work, right? But my opinion is, it's fucking really inconvenient if you need a doctor and he's on strike. But at the same time, no one can be forced to work, surely, Andy.
And everybody
if
has
they want
the right
to fucking strike.
Everybody
they can strike. Yeah, doctors or otherwise.
And where the fuck
Even
are we?
the Prime Minister could strike if he wanted. Maybe he should.
Where the fuck are we if doctors, whose reason for existence is to save lives and to heal people and treat people, and let's be honest, they're really into it. That's why they do it. They really want people. There's a few exceptions. Harold Shipman, people like that.
Yeah.
There's a few exceptions.
Ross McDonald.
Yeah. Well,
I think he did want to save people.
He's not practicing anymore, so let's not.
Let's
not muddy the waters. But doctors, on the whole, really want people to get well and stay alive and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when they are going out on strike and turning their backs on those people who they're trying to help and save and heal, then there's something wrong.
I mean,
we've covered
Jesus,
this before.
What, how can they force them not to strike? What do they say? If you strike, that's it. You haven't got a job. They can't say that. Then they'd be left with a load of and anyway, all those doctors just go into the private sector or go and get a job abroad.
Yeah,
go and be a doctor in Italy.
Maybe that's what they want. I don't know. I mean, there was that tycoon there was a clip of him doing a speech on YouTube the other day, or Twitter, and he's saying that there needs to be more unemployment.
Unemployment
needs to be 40%,
so
that the workers can have a bit of a think about whether they want to be objecting to their pitifully low wages or not.
Oh, I see. Fucking hell.
Cunt. He's now walked back slightly on them comments after some global pushback. But yeah, I don't know. So we're looking at the general strike of
I mean, what we really want to know is we talked about all this, but how does Demis Roussos fit into this grand narrative about industrial action?
Why does he have to? But I briefly mentioned The Good Life there when you're talking about living off the land, and it got me thinking about something I saw the other day. I was watching something, it was about The Good Life, and The Good Life had finished in 1977. May 1977 was the last episode. I think we talked about it before, where the Goods house got burgled, and the burglars had sprayed graffiti all over the walls and everything. And it was like, oh fuck! But they kind of Tom had the chance of getting his old job back, but they said no, we're going to carry on living this good life. It really is a good life, as they said to the camera.
That was the last line, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know if it was. I just made that up. I'm not sure. We really were. Dad's Army. And then there was a Christmas special a few months later, but it came back for one more episode 7 months later because of one reason. Because Her Majesty the Queen insisted on it.
No.
Yes.
That's incredible.
The BBC were going to do a thing where they were going to have a special, get the Queen in to watch a show being made as a special thing, part of a jubilee, I think, a silver jubilee. And they said to her, Mum, is there one television show you'd love to see made? And she went, yes, very much so. I'd love to see The Good Life. It's my favourite.
It's a fucking cracker. Every fucking week I look forward to that. Fucking brilliant. And it makes me think twice as well. I wouldn't mind doing a bit of that myself.
I've got the land for it. I'll get rid of the corgis, get some pigs.
I'd go up fucking Balmoral, live off the land. Wouldn't have to do any of this shit anymore.
See what you fucking think about that, you cunt.
Very well, Mum. I shall notify the BBC. Mum, 2 days later, Mum, it appears that the show is no longer in existence. What the fuck's that supposed to mean? I saw it last week. I believe, Mum, that's what's known as a rerun. Fucking hell, I thought they were live. No, they're not, Mum. They're not live at all.
That was the radio in the 1950s. It's not like that anymore.
Is there a second choice? No, there fucking isn't. Tell them.
Put the phone down.
Tell them that I fucking want them to make another show, and I want to watch it being fucking made. And if not, how about I shut the whole fucking BBC down?
Nice corporation you've got here. Be a shame if something happened to it. So they fucking brought The Good Life back, and there's footage of the Queen meeting the cast and then sitting in a special royal box that they made in the middle of the studio audience. So they had to write and make one extra episode of The Good Life just so the fucking Queen could turn up and watch it.
Mate, who is still alive from The Good Life, from the core four of The Good Life?
Penelope Keith and Felicity Kendall, the two fellas.
Are you sure Keith's alive? I thought she's... Oh, yeah, no, she is, because recently, did we do a story, or did I just read this, that Penelope Keith has been involved in a political clash.
She's in activism now, I think.
Yeah. There's a church which I've been to. It's called the Actors Church in Covent Garden.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
And there's I went to it on a school trip with the school last year, and and it's something to do with, like, there's a bunch of actors who are a committee devoted to raising funds and maintaining it and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And it was in the paper that her and another famous actor were like the bosses of, they were the head of the committee, but they got ousted in a coup by like a more forward thinking set of actors, and it got very vitriolic. And I can't remember. I remember seeing it and thinking me and Andy should examine this, but maybe I didn't. It's quite a good scandal.
There was concerns over its governance, the Actors Benevolent Fund. And,
that's it.
Penelope Keith said the fund's problems had been exacerbated by meetings being held remotely during the past 2 years instead of monthly in-person gatherings. She said, the dreaded Zoom was a great problem. I loathed it. With Zoom meetings, the people who talk and talk and talk will talk and talk and talk. The people you really want to hear won't have their say. That was the time the division started in the council. It just got worse and worse. I put a lot of this down to Zoom. She said she had written to Prince Charles to let him know there was a bit of trouble at Mill.
You have no authority here, Penelope Keith. Yes. No authority whatsoever.
Yes. Fucking hell.
T-shirt idea. Whoa! T-shirt idea. You have no authority here, Penelope Keith.
That was about 18 months ago. I don't know what the latest is with that. But there was a documentary on Channel 5 about her recently. And I've got no recollection.
About this problem?
About Penelope Keith.
This problem?
Just the life of Penelope Keith.
Yeah.
And I've got no recollection of this, but there was a sitcom she was in the 90s on the BBC called Next of Kin. And the premise was this. Penelope Keith was married to a fella. Do you remember that sitcom No Place Like Home?
Yes.
And the dad in the family was quite a hangdog kind of fella. And I've forgotten what his name was. But anyway, he was her husband in this Next of Kin. And in the very first episode, in pretty much the first scene, a policeman turns up at their house to tell them that their son and his wife have been killed in a car accident.
Fucking hell.
Yeah. Bang! Off you go. Where's the laughs?
Yeah.
And then they have to take
I'm looking at this guy now, yeah. Steve Finn. I remember him well, yeah.
They've got to take in the 3 kids who are their grandchildren, and they've got to look after them.
William Gaunt, sorry.
William Gaunt, that's him. Yeah.
I think he was in like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or something like that.
He's been in loads of stuff, but he was in No Place Like Home, which was that mirthless BBC sitcom.
Oh, The Champions. He was one of... Do you remember The Champions, which was a bit like The Avengers? He was one of them. He's
86 now. Good for him.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy, actually, when you see him when he was young.
Yeah, so, and that was the sitcom. They had to bring up their 3 grandchildren with the huge, the generation.
Oh, that's awful. If I was writing that sitcom, I'd think, okay, not a bad premise, grandparents bringing up kids because of the huge sort of generational gap, blah, blah, blah. But can't you just set it a few years after the parents have died so we don't have to go through the grief?
Yeah, maybe start
I'm not
off
being
with them,
disrespectful, but it's a sitcom.
Yeah, start off with them visiting the grave or something like that. But then I guess the comedy comes from the immediate clash of them coming together. You can't do it a few years down the line where they'll have become accustomed to each other a little bit. It's got to be... Because Penelope Keith's character was... Her attitude was, fuck that. When she was told she was going to bring up her grandkids.
I'm gearing up for fucking retirement with my feet up.
We've got
Couple
the holiday
of
in Sardinia we've just paid for. Fuck this.
We've literally just finished paying that off.
Yeah.
Right, and now, fuck not, I don't know. Are we going to have to sell it? Kids aren't cheap. Who's fucking funding this?
And that's it. And there was 60 episodes. It went on for like 4 series. I've got no recollection of it whatsoever, but it's all on YouTube.
I strongly feel with anything like that, I bet I watched every episode but have no recollection of it. Yeah, because there were so many sitcoms that I'd just watch any sitcom in the 80s and 90s up until, I guess, the mid-90s. Right, I'd just be watching anything. Any night it was a sitcom, be like, yeah, I'm watching that. But they'd just sort of, most of them would just wash over you, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Because there'd be similar cast members, interchangeable plot lines, lots of canned laughter. It was, the ones we talk about were the real standout ones, but it was hard to stand out.
Yeah, but I'm looking at when it was out, Sam, and it was 1995 to 1997. And that's to me, that's pub. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pub.
There was a lot of Caffreys being consumed. I mean, those sitcoms would generally go out at 8 o'clock?
Yeah. 4 nights a week, I'm in the pub, minimum.
Yeah, those years were certainly, for anyone of roughly our generation, they were very much the drinking years.
And I would have learned how to set the video recorder for anything that was going to be on I really wanted to watch, any comedy stuff.
But all the good shows were like, it was a good era because they put on all those great shows for when you got back from the pub.
Yeah.
So things like The Fast Show, Shooting Stars, I feel like, in my mind at least, during those years, every time I came in from the pub, Prince Nassim was just doing his ring walk.
Well,
I'd stumble back to my student accommodation just in time to see Prince Nassim backflipping into a fucking boxing ring, and you'd be like, "Way!" and open your takeout Caffrey's cans you've just brought home with you.
Well, I've always got this recollection I talk about with me mates about we used to go to the Sunderland match in like 99, 2000, 2001 when we were doing well. We'd won the championship and we were 7th in the Premier League. Phillips and Quinn years. And all I remember is every Saturday we'd go to the match, the sun would be shining, we'd win probably 4-1, Phillips would score 2 or 3, and then we'd go to the pub afterwards, stay out, and Ricky Hatton would be fighting on the Saturday night. We'd watch that on the telly while we were in the pub. And I thought, that can't be right. But then the Ricky Hatton documentary was on the other week. I don't know if you've seen it. It's very good. It's very good. His dad does not come out of it well. Might talk about it at some point once you've watched it. But the Ricky Hatton thing, and I looked, and he was fighting once a month, pretty much, in those early years. He wasn't fighting great fighters, they went for titles or stuff, but he was fucking fighting every month. He was just hitting some poor bastard in the guts once a month.
Anthony Joshua, I mean, I doubt he'll fight much more anymore, but he was like doing like 1 or 2 a year at the most, wasn't he?
Yeah. I'm looking at
I was listening the other night when I was, I told you about how I had to go to Reading to pick up my daughter and her mates at the Reading Festival. Fucking nightmare, stuck in traffic for like hours and hours and hours. And I ended up listening to Simon Jordan on TalkSport doing a 2-hour interview with Barry McGuigan.
Right.
I've got to say, I fucking loved every moment of it, mate. It was like midnight. I was crawling through traffic in Reading City Centre. I mean, literally, I was travelling like maybe 10 metres every half hour, right? It was, but I thought, I'm flicking through the stations and I was like, oh, yeah, all right, yeah, there's old Barry McGuigan. And it made me think that the generation before that, because Nassim was very much mid-90s. Yeah, Ricky Hatton came a bit after that. Yeah. But in the 80s, when I was a lad, if it wasn't Bruno, it was McGuigan. And everyone fucking loved McGuigan, didn't they? Yeah. And he was really good. Simon Jordan's pretty good at interviewing. And McGuigan's very good. And it reminded me of the story that I'm sure I've told you before, is that I heard that Barry McGuigan was addicted to tea at one point in his career and drank up to 100 cups a day.
Whoa.
And I dropped this, right? I dropped this fact. A mate of mine told me it years ago, and it was one of those facts that's like, I didn't know whether it was true, but I'm going to hold on to that and treasure it, and I'm going to regurgitate it every chance I get. Yeah. And I've dropped it on TalkSport. They go, we're doing a show in the afternoon, and someone goes, right, coming up later today, Barry McGuigan. And I go, oh yeah, Barry McGuigan, addicted to tea. And whoever I was with, like Paul Hawksby, whoever goes, what are you talking about? And I said, yeah, apparently he was addicted to tea, drank 100 cups a day, right? And then it was one of my biggest ever tastes of what you call a massive Lampard pylon, a very specific type of pylon, where people don't just shrug and do what the appropriate reaction is, which is to shrug, smile, and go, fuck me, that cunt Delaney comes out with some shit. Right, and then just go on with your life. They go, that can't be so. And I got so many people explaining to me how it was not possible to drink. Well, if he's drinking 100 cups a day, it takes such and such time to fill and boil the kettle. Then 3 minutes for the average cup to brew. Then consumption would take blah, blah. Right, so he would have to be getting up at 4 a.m. and all this stuff. Like, why are you doing the maths of this?
He's got time on his hands. Of course he's doing it.
I just gave the answer to her. I said, well, he's got a fucking tea urn. The bloke's minted. He'll have a fucking tea urn, and he'll probably have someone like a tea lady who fills it up at the beginning of the day, and he's just fucking chugging it out of the tea urn non-stop, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, here's a story. 2011, Daily Express. 5 things I can't live without. Barry McGuigan. Number 4 on the list. Yeah. He's downplaying all of this. Number 4 on the list, cup of tea.
Yes, see?
He says, now that I'm not fighting, I don't believe in depriving myself. And these days, I often drink 8 cups of tea a day. He's lying. It's at least 80. It's at least 80. Okay. And then he says, as habits go, I guess it's not a terrible indulgence, but I'm certainly addicted. There you go. He's confessed. He's addicted to tea.
There you go. That is verified. We don't have verification on the 100 cups a day. I did meet him because I've got a photo of me with him that I treasure, and I can't remember because I think I met him about 12 years ago, and I was like, a lot of the time I was under the influence, but I've got a photo, and I think that I must have asked him. It's just not the sort of thing that I would never. Yeah, but you don't. I know myself, and there's no way I'd have let that opportunity
pass. But in the photo,
he's
got a cup of tea in each hand and one on the floor.
And one balanced on top of his head.
So
what a man.
Part 2 of the Demis Roussos Odyssey. We'll be back with more next week, and maybe we'll cover something about Demis Roussos. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.